Maybe not so ready. Sounds like we're ready for takeoff. Hello, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Jay Wagner calling to order our 3:30 High Point City Council special meeting. For those listening online, here present at City Hall, we have Councilman Britt Moore. I am present at City Hall, as is Councilman Williams, Hudson, and Jefferson. We expect Council members Jones and Peters soon, and I'll try to let you know when they've arrived. We have several items on the agenda today, and the first one is the presentation of our fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. And for that, I'll turn it over to the city manager and her team for that presentation.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. We have our FY 22-23 proposed budget that we'll be presenting to council for the first time. We tried to craft this year's budget thinking about the priorities that council established as part of the strategic plan, discussions that we've had around new projects, potential grant opportunities that we see coming, thinking about debt that will be coming online in the next year, and also about the staff that we'll need to recruit and also retain as we're moving forward. We realized this year was a reval year for us, and there was a significant increase to our tax base. So we also tried to take that into consideration, realizing that there is still some uncertainty in terms of what our citizens are facing, but also what the city is facing. So all of those things together, staff evaluated in preparing the proposed budget. So at this time, I would ask Steve if he would prepare our presentation for you. And then we'll also have an opportunity near the end to talk about our future work sessions. We'll go into a little bit more detail to dive into the budget, talk about how we're funding for agencies will have to be determined, and then if there are any changes that council would like for us to see.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. We're going to get a little in the weeds on some of these slides, but we do want to kind of paint the full picture of what's going on with the proposed FY 22-23 budget. So kind of an overview on what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the context of the budget, mainly some of the challenges that have been impacting this year's budget, which have drastically changed from this time last year. We're going to go over the total budget, including revenues and expenditures, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the general fund and some of our major enterprise funds, specifically water, sewer, electric, and solid waste. And then we're going to give you all a little snapshot of the capital improvement plan, also known as our CIP, and then we're going to talk about next steps. So thinking about the budget in terms of context and the challenges we faced, when the year started, I think the reval was probably at the top of at least our list in budget evaluation, and kind of what was the next step in coming out of the pandemic. And that drastically changed early on in the fall with the Delta variant. We also faced the Omicron variant kind of early winter to middle of the winter. And so still thinking about providing our services in a times of a pandemic or an endemic or whatever is kind of our new normal with regards to COVID-19. Other issues we face dealing with the supply chain that you've seen with contracts brought forward to you, seeing with your citizens and your other constituents, with the delivery of equipment, vehicle purchases, just can't be as reliable on the timeframes that we're traditionally used to. Inflation, another major challenge. Prices of goods cost a lot more. We're buying things that cost way more than we thought when this current year's budget was adopted. Fuel prices specifically, we'll show a slide later that shows what we were paying last spring for gas, and then we'll show you all what we're paying from a month ago or 2 months ago in mid-March, a drastic increase. Retention and recruitment. The city is not immune from the effects of the Great Resignation, and council has taken steps to address some of those issues during this fiscal year, but there are still challenges that remain. The countywide revaluation. This is a Guilford County revaluation. The last one was in 2017. And then our continued restoration of budgets to pre-pandemic levels. The current year's budget did a very good job of getting us back to some of those pre-pandemic levels. But there are still some things like vehicle replacement, general capital, our fire apparatus replacement program that we couldn't quite get into the current year's budget, and we're making an attempt to get it in next year's budget to keep those programs going. And so the total budget, and this is all funds for FY 22-23, is $464.3 million. I'll note the electric kind of there at the top and general fund. Between the two of those, that's about 60% of the budget. If you add in water sewer, that's almost 75% of the budget. And within electric, about $96 million of their budget is just the purchase of wholesale power, and that is the largest expense in the budget. So that kind of drives those really large kind of pieces of that pie there. The chart shows our revenues, and this is kind of how we categorize them between fund balance and property taxes and sales and use taxes, all down the line. I will note specifically on the charges for service, that $252 million proposed number. That's made up primarily of your electric charges, your water sewer rates, your solid waste revenues. In the general fund, recreation is your predominant charges for service department, but really those enterprise funds are driving that high number. On intergovernmental, I'll just note some of these things are money from the federal government to help support our transit operation, and our PAL bill funds, which help with street maintenance. And so the bottom line compared to the FY 21-22 adopted budget is an increase of almost $48 million, or 11.5%.
Did you speak about this last item, reimbursement/transfers? Is the number off right there? It's showing the amount change is 11 million. Is it not supposed to show that?
That may be, we will check our information. That may be it may have just been a 1.9 on that, but we'll double check on that. Thank you for that. Diving into some of the details on the revenues, the proposed budget reduces the tax rate by 3 cents to 61.75 cents per $100 of valuation. It also proposes a 4% increase in water sewer rates. It proposes several fee schedule changes. Specifically in Parks and Recreation, there's some schedule changes to shelter rentals, also to our golf course greens fees, and also some increases in new fees at City Lake Park. There's also new fees for fire inspections, permits, and violations, and then some other miscellaneous fees, some cemetery fees for public services, some changes to library fees, and also for the city clerk's budget, records are now being used with USB drives, and so we have a fee because we have to the cost of those USB drives. And so just some miscellaneous things like that. The proposed budget does not include any increases to electric rates, stormwater fees, or landfill and garbage collection fees. do want to dive a little bit more into the property tax rate. 1 cent on the tax rate for this proposed budget brings in about $1.275 million in revenue. The property tax rate is split between the general fund and the debt service fund. The debt service fund remains at 3.4 cents, and that 3 cent reduction is in the general fund, bringing that from 61.35 cents to 58.35 cents. Since it's a reval year, we are required to publish the revenue neutral tax rate, and that's the rate that would produce the same revenue if no revaluation had occurred, and it does assume natural growth. And so these are just some of the key variables in that calculation. The current tax base is about $10.3 billion, which brought in a levy of almost $67 million. And so to get that same levy with a proposed tax base of $12.8 billion, factoring in 1.87% growth, the revenue neutral tax rate equates to 52.97 cents. A few more notes on the reval. Real property in Guilford County is proposed to increase 30.9%. The overall tax base for all of our counties is proposed to increase 24.5%. And just for some context, the last Guilford reval was in 2017, and that valuation growth was about 4.4%. So drastically higher than what was seen in 2017, which affected the FY18 budget. This table just shows kind of what the tax impact is of the new rate, but also trying to factor in some of the growth. And so we have values of $150,000, $200,000, and $250,000. What the property tax rate for city taxes would be at our current 64.75 cents. Just kind of assume 25% across the board. Obviously, the changes in everyone's home values is, as high as 50%, could be, lower than 10%. We just kind of use one number as a baseline. Then with our proposed 3 cent reduction in the tax rate, that would be the annual change for folks that have. These are just snapshots. Everyone's situation is obviously very different. And so the monthly charge or a monthly change ranging for these level value of homes from $15 a month up to $25 a month. But again, it really varies depending on what change you saw from the Guilford County reval. Just another note on this, looked at U.S. Census kind of demographic data, and the median home value from 2016 to 2020 for the city of High Point was about $162,000. Could not find an official government kind of comparison of what we're seeing now. However, if you Google High Point median tax value, you get a Zillow estimate. I guess they kind of figured it out, and they had it about $209,000. So I wouldn't call that an official government source, but just kind of paints a picture of how much that's increased even since that time frame, which is about 29%. Other revenues, sales tax have been doing extremely well for the current year. Our current projections have us 11.1% over how we ended FY 2021, which is about $2.65 million. We want to be conservative, but also reasonable in our projections for next year, and so our current projections are about 4% above our projected year end. We've seen some other governments talking about 3%, some talking about 5%. We feel this is kind of in that sweet spot, depending how things continue going into the rest of this fiscal year and into next fiscal year. On the intergovernmental side, up $1.6 million budget to budget. Your transit operating and capital reimbursements are a large driver of this. Some of those reimbursements are also based on spending. Our POW bill allocation from the state has increased $365,000, and just our additional grants we received from the federal and state governments are increased $257,000. Our charges for service, again, those are mainly our enterprise funds. Water sewer up $5.6 million, electric up $3.2 million, and then just our others kind of catch that other $3.48 million to make up that total $12.2 million increase for that revenue category. Looking at the expenditure side, personnel services is about 33% of the total budget. They're increasing almost $12.9 million, or about 9%. I'll note capital outlay is up almost 39%, about $11.8 million. And again, that's across all funds, so that includes your water sewer capital and your electric capital. There is some general capital also restored in the budget, but not just things that are funded by our city's property tax dollars. And again, that matches the increase on the expenditure side of almost $48 million, or 11.5%. Again, diving into a little bit more detail. First with personnel, the increase about $12.9 million. There were two actions taken by this council in February to deal with retention and recruitment, and that was a 2.5% cost of living adjustment and an increase to the minimum rate of pay to $15 an hour. So those full annualized costs are about $3.2 million, and so those have added to our base budget. In addition to that, some proposed salary changes for next year, continuing our pay for performance, an average 3% mid-year merit adjustment, a proposal to increase the city's match for 401k and 457 contributions from 1% to 3%, and that would be effective on January 1st, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that in the next few slides. The city's contribution to the local government employees retirement system has been increasing about on an annual basis, and it continued that increase, and so that's about $2 million citywide. And then increase employer costs to our city health plan, but this is on the employer side, not on the employee side. The proposed budget does not increase employee contributions for their health plan. So I want to just dive a little bit deeper into some of the benefits changes. Several benefits changes were researched, budget office in consultation with the Human Resources Department and the city manager's office, and we wanted to look at what's the benefit to employees, what's the fiscal impact, and how do we compare with other municipalities. And three specific kind of benefits changes that were studied were the city's match to 401k/457 contributions, paid parental leave, and an employee health clinic. And so this table shows just our municipal comparisons on these three. And so you'll see High Point at the bottom, and that's what's being proposed in this budget. And so High Point was at 1% on the 401k 457 match, which was kind of near the bottom there with Fayetteville. Going to 3% gets us above Fayetteville, above Winston-Salem, and on par with what Charlotte and Raleigh are doing. And I'll note that this is not an automatic contribution. For an employee to receive the 3%, they have to contribute at least 1% on their own. The other comparisons for paid parental leave and employee health clinic, you see it kind of varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but neither of those are recommended in this proposed budget. Speaking of new positions, the proposed budget includes 11 full-time and 3 part-time positions. The first 3 lines there, the 2 for the city attorney's office and for the fire department, those are in the general fund. Then there is a power line technician in the electric department, and that's just switching costs that's being handled with an existing contract. A water plant supervisor in water sewer, grounds maintenance supervisor, and 3 part-time groundskeepers for solid waste, and those are to deal with the growing kind of area of downtown. A solid waste manager and assistant superintendent for solid waste, and then a stormwater superintendent. And I will note, you see the totals for the assistant superintendent, the stormwater superintendent, the water plant supervisor. Those include vehicles for those work duties, and so that's ranging anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000 of that cost. In year 2, that cost would obviously go away as those vehicles would have been purchased. In addition to those new positions, the budget proposes to add the following 9 full-time and 2 part-time titles within the general fund. And so what our plan is here is in Q1 of the new fiscal year to monitor our vacant positions and see where areas can be identified and repurposed, and they would go to these positions. What that does is it lessens the fiscal impact and it doesn't further add to the city's FTE count. By using the first quarter to do this, we can make sure that any type of service impacts would have minimal to no impact on our citizens. Diving in deeper on the operating side, fuel is a large driver of our operating increase. And so this is the chart of just what the city has paid for just regular unleaded since spring of 2021. And I'll note, the city, when we purchase fuel, we don't pay federal or state fuel taxes. And so that's why those numbers are significantly lower than what you would see out at just a gas station out in the city. And so paying about $1.61 a gallon last spring. You see a gradual increase into the fall, and then it just kept creeping up. March 2022 was kind of the last snapshot we had in discussion with the fleet at $3.16 a gallon. I will note that talking with other governments, some are doubling their fuel budgets completely. Ours goes up not quite 75%. We're going to keep monitoring fuel on a monthly basis. Hope that it stabilizes or goes down. If it remains high, we'll keep monitoring it, and we'll develop a plan to make sure we can still have the fuel for the services that need it. In addition, on the operating side, our fleet charges are up $1.1 million. This is kind of due to some increases in fleet's budget. We're trying to increase how many vehicles and rolling stock we're replacing, and the departments kind of pay a charge into fleet to pay for that. And so that's what that 1.1 million stands for. On these utility budgets, just going up, electric, water, phone lines, this is what the departments are paying for these services, up a little over $700,000. And then just inflationary increases, supplies, chemicals, kind of things of that nature. Things are costing more, just as it's costing everyone else more. And so we've tried to factor that in so we don't have to, departments are going to want to be able to purchase the things they need to do the services that they do on a daily basis. And so factoring in a budget for those inflationary increases is our goal there. And then on the capital and capital outlay side, 11.7 million in total. On the capital outlay, this budget proposes to restore the fire apparatus replacement program. This has kind of been deferred through COVID, and then back in, I believe it was February, when you did some critical items that were deferred as part of last year's budget, we were able to fund some fire vehicle replacement. This now gets it into the budget. It's a replacement of a dive truck and a replacement of an engine. And then in fleet services, again, that vehicle replacement was deferred during COVID, and so we're trying to get that back up to what is, needs to be replacing. And so we bumped that budget up $1 million to about $3.5 million. But I will note the full list of vehicles that met the replacement criteria totaled about $7 million. On the overall capital side, we're restoring general capital. That's $2.55 million. Of that, $1.4 million is funded by a transfer from the general fund. This was a zero in the current year's budget. And so that's one of those attempts at restoring budgets to pre-pandemic levels. Again, a lot of the current year's capital was funded through the critical items that were deferred during the budget, that action that you all took back in February. And this is a way to get some of those recurring capital expenses back into the budget. And then just electric up $2.84 billion, water, sewer, and the other funds are up to make up that overall increase. And so that's kind of the big picture of all funds. And the next slides will just kind of go in a little bit more detail. Some of it you'll see again for the general fund and then our enterprise funds. And so the general fund, again, property tax reduction of 3 cents. Those fee schedule changes we talked about, they're just about all in the general fund. Our sales and use taxes are increasing $3.1 million. I do have a note there about FY 23-24 potential reduction in distribution percentage. And I'll keep this without getting too much in the weeds, but how much property tax revenue we have budgeted compares with all the other cities in the county, and that determines how much sales tax we get. And so if we lower our tax rate 3 cents and every other jurisdiction and the county keep their rate the same, our distribution of sales tax in FY 23-24 could go down. Of course, the big what if is we don't know what all the other governments are going to do with their tax rate. But I did want to note that that's just kind of a 1 year later result of when there are drastic changes to your property tax rate.
Can you just, I want to sure I heard you right. If we reduce our property tax rate and others do not reduce their property tax rate,
Yes.
then our distribution percentage of the sales and use tax could change, and change as in it could go down.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty much a proportion of how much property tax revenue you have budgeted in any given year. The other option that of how cities can receive sales tax is per capita, which is based on population. Guilford County distributes on the property tax method.
Is there any way to know what that could look like?
I ran a very high-level estimate on the current proposed rate going down 3 cents, and everyone else just keeping their rate the same of what it is. So none of them going down to revenue neutral or making any reductions, and that could cost us a ballpark estimate of about $750,000. Again, we'll know early June really what that number looks like once everyone's adopted their budget, and we can kind of factor in what their shares are. But it is just one kind of result that happens when tax rates are changed, especially in a reval year when there's kind of everyone's having that conversation.
So for more clarification for me and everyone listening, the the sales tax distribution that we get is not based on sales tax that we bring inside the city. It's the whole county collects sales tax, and we get a distribution percentage essentially based on the property tax rate or property taxes revenue that we bring in. I won't even get into all the
Yeah,
why, it's just.
that's correct, yeah.
I think all the clarification.
Yeah, sales tax is pretty much a county-wide revenue that we get a share of.
Right.
That's then distributed. So every sales tax dollar could be made in purchases within the city of High Point, and that would still go to Guilford County and then be distributed based on this distribution method.
Now, is that based on a formula, or is that something that county commissioner sets or anything like that?
The county commissioners have the option to choose either per capita or the ad valorem share, the property tax share. Most counties go with what's going to give them more sales tax, and in this case, the ad valorem share gives them more because they have such a large piece of the tax base, and so they're able to generate a higher property tax revenue amount.
I would think 750 is an acceptable number if that means giving the citizens a little bit of a break. So,
And where it helps us is if we know it's coming, we can plan for it. And that's why that year lag is very helpful to us when this happens to be changed. Just the last two bullets, licenses and permits increased about $271,000. Our building permit activity is doing really well, and we're seeing increases that have kind of continued on. And so we've been able to bump that budget up. And then charges for service are increased about $325,000. And this is existing increased usage at our parks and recreation programs, mainly golf and the campground. This does not factor in any increased revenue we would see from a change to the parks and recreation user fees. It's just more people are using those services, and so we're able to bump the budget up to more accurately reflect what we're seeing. Going into the personnel side, and the next three slides, we've tried to tie some of the major increases to a tax rate equivalent, just to kind of showcase, what's really is that doing and driving the increase in the general fund. And so the 2.5% COLA, that's the general fund piece of that, $1.47 million. The increase to $15 an hour, another $500,000. So between those two, that's almost a penny and a half on the tax rate. And then the other increases, the average 3-year mid-year merit adjustment, the increased Elders contribution, the increased 401k effective in January, increased healthcare costs, and then the 5 new positions, which were 2 assistant city attorneys, a paralegal, and 2 battalion fire chiefs. We kind of did the same exercise on the operating and capital outlay side. Fuel, the general fund piece, and that's mainly police and fire, over half a penny equivalent on the tax rate, which, thinking back to where we were even in the fall, it's substantial. Your vehicle replacement charges, we try to bring up those vehicle replacements to, kind of get more of what's meeting the replacement criteria. Phone utility budgets, that's just increased costs. Computer software licenses, kind of the same scenario there. The fire apparatus replacement, it's a big number, and going from 0 to 851,000, trying to find a recurring revenue source for that. And so that's what's driving that. And then other capital outlay, there's some, non-apparatus pieces of equipment in fire. There's some items in recreation that are kind of handled by the departments and don't really get to that level of a vehicle or a piece of rolling stock, and so they're not on that replacement schedule. And then lastly, just on our interfund transfers, so what's almost driving the entire increase are the transfer to debt service, the transfer to general capital, and the transfer to mass transit. I will note on the debt service, that's really driven by the tax increment finance transfer for the Catalyst area, and so the growth in the Catalyst area has brought in a ton more additional property tax revenue, and so we're having to pay some of that back to the debt service as per how that was set up. The transfer to general capital, $1.4 million, and again, this is one of those trying to restore to some level in the operating budget, and so it's going from 0 to $1.4 million. And then the transfer to mass transit, we were fortunate the past few years to have some federal kind of CARES Act, ARP, a lot of these bills that provided support to transit programs specifically, that's fallen off, and so we still have our transit operating costs, and so the subsidy needs to be increased to cover those costs. Next, we'll go through some of the enterprise funds, and these are just snapshots specifically of water, sewer, electric, and solid waste. And so on the water sewer side, the budget does propose a 4% increase to water sewer rates. And these rates help fund increased costs for personnel, for operating. I noted fuel and chemicals. Chemicals have been a very large inflationary increase for water sewer. And then also our capital infrastructure as the system continues to age. The proposed budget includes no appropriation of water sewer reserves. It does propose the addition of one water plant supervisor position. This position would serve as the lead in meeting new regulations for lead and copper testing, which are beginning to come online for us. And we have PAYGO capital projects totaling a little over $10.3 million. On the electric side, the budget proposes no changes to electric rates. Our rate consultant is currently finalizing a rate study looking at a potential restructuring of commercial and industrial rates. That study is not complete. When it is, the findings will be presented to this council. The budget does include the addition of one power line technician, and this is just workload that's currently being handled by a contract, and so the cost of that contract's starting to creep up a little bit, so Electric thought it was better to just add a power line technician and kind of have the service provided through that. Wholesale power costs of $96.15 million, which is our largest expenditure in the entire budget, and then PAYGO capital projects totaling a little over $11.3 million. And lastly, on the enterprise funds, the solid waste side, no changes to landfill or garbage collection fees, but there is the addition of 3 full-time and 3 part-time positions. First, on the environmental services side, the addition of a grounds maintenance supervisor and 3 part-time groundskeepers, and these are to serve the growing needs in the downtown area. And then on the landfill operations side, a solid waste manager position and an assistant solid waste superintendent. Operating increases for solid waste are driven by vehicle replacement costs, also vehicle repairs, and higher fuel prices, especially on the solid waste collection side. And also includes PAYGO capital projects totaling a little over $5.9 million. And just lastly, on the capital improvement plan, this is just a snapshot of the total capital projects kind of by area. There is an appendix to this that lists all the full list of all the projects. And so, and I'll just note on the general capital, 1.4 of that 2.5 million was funded out of the general fund. The other is funded by kind of a project that encompasses all the different funds, and so the other funds are helping contribute to the cost of that. And the proposed capital projects for next year totaling a little over $33 million. So in terms of next steps, this is the current proposed budget work session calendar. Next Wednesday from 3 to 5. Next Thursday from 3 to 4, and that would be if necessary. At tonight's council meeting, we'll ask you to consider setting Monday, May 16th for the public hearing on the proposed budget. And then we've set Thursday, May 19th and Monday, May 23rd as, again, if necessary dates for the budget work sessions. The budget has been filed with the city clerk. A copy is also in the budget and evaluation suite downstairs. A copy will be available at the public library, and the budget will be available on the city's website. And before we get into questions, I do just want to take a moment to recognize our 2 budget analysts, Linda Price and Rosalind McNeil. We would not get this budget done and out in this manner without their help. They've been vital to getting everything together for it, working with departments on the requests and making sure all the questions that we need answered before we got a proposed budget together were asked and answered. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I appreciate this information. This is Councilman Jefferson. I appreciate the information. You mentioned all of what we've done in the Catalyst project. Certainly, while it's easy to understand our property tax revenue increasing, obviously, just as more buildings go up, those buildings are going to have value. I'm thinking about part of what we hope to have done is that property value, part of the property value increase would have been because of what we've been doing to improve sort of what's here in our city. Is there any way to measure, I guess, how, because you mentioned on average about 25% we think in property value increases. Is there any way to measure, in my mind, how High Point did, and if it's on a county level, how the county did in regards to some of the other, I guess, property value increases in other places?
We could reach out to the county tax office. They were clear to us earlier about not wanting to, I was just like, well, what's the average for residential properties? Just because thought that might be a question that someone asked, and they said they try not to pinpoint an average just because if they come out publicly with it's an average of 20% and then someone went up 30%, because everyone's situation is unique. But we can reach out to the county and see what information they can provide and provide that report back to you.
Okay. Also a question regarding, I guess, back to that distribution part about the sales tax and how that was impacted by revaluation, what that could mean, I guess, if we didn't do a sales tax reduction. I'm probably going in the weeds here. I got a lot of thoughts. We can wait to talk about that because I imagine we probably got some stuff to talk about today. But that's on my mind, and we can wait to talk about it until that other, I think, answer comes back because that's a part of it.
Part of that too, Councilmember, just to be a function of what other organizations do with their tax rate. So we'll have to spend a little bit of time to wait and see what those recommendations look like compared to what we're recommending.
One thing that seems to come up every year, and I didn't see it in your presentation, is the amount that we're spending on street paving. That was something that for a long time in the city we've been trying to catch up on. That's been underfunded for a while. I'm just wondering what those numbers are. If you can, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but if you do, that's fine. And if not, maybe bring it up during the work session.
Yeah, I know there was increase last year as part of the additional motor vehicle privilege tax increase, but we'll get that exact number and have it at next week's work session.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Thank you very
And I'll just note, there's an item on tonight's agenda. It's an abbreviated version of this, so it may be repeat information for you all, but knowing that in case people are tuning in, they'll also want to hear that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so next on the agenda is, I think, our legislative update. And we have back with us the illustrious Fred Baggett, our former city attorney and our man in Raleigh. Fred, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. It is great to be back and see people and places and things that are real familiar to me. For those of you who may not know or have forgotten, I was a city attorney here for a long time. And my role now is to try to help with issues or problems or questions that City of High Point or its people here who work for the city have in Raleigh, mainly in the area of legislation in the State General Assembly. A lot of bills, of course, affect all cities. Some affect High Point more than others. So I try to stay abreast of issues that affect cities and work with the League of Municipalities on those issues and try to keep you informed on what's happened and what may happen. I had a meeting with the League lobbying staff just last week on issues that may come up in the short session. For those of you not familiar with the legislative rhythm, this is the year of the so-called short session of the General Assembly. In the even-numbered years, it's a short session. In the long session is in the odd-numbered years, which was last year. In the odd number of long sessions, anything and everything can be brought up, and it lasts anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Last year, it was 12 months. Short sessions are supposedly limited to state budget items that may need adjustment at this time, and bills that have passed one house but not the other. Which brings me to one of the main things I'm working on in Raleigh for you now specifically and particularly is a local bill for High Point, which you asked for last year, which is gives the City Council the discretionary authority to delegate to P&Z, if you want to, some final zoning authority. You must incorporate some appeal process for petitioners to appeal the decision of P&Z back to the council. But the parameters and the details and the procedure of how that would work is left completely up to you under this bill. The state law says that city councils approve all rezonings. This bill, like several other cities, would allow the council to delegate to P and Z certain categories of zoning cases, some zoning cases, not others, under whatever criteria you decide. That bill flew through the House of Representatives last year. Representative Faircloth, I wrote the bill. Representative Faircloth agreed to introduce the bill. It flew through the House. I think it passed unanimously. It has been stuck in the Senate Rules Committee ever since, for unknown reasons. Representative Faircloth has been diligent in trying to get it sprung from the Senate Rules Committee. It is eligible for consideration and final passage by the Senate in the short session. I met with Representative Faircloth in his office in Raleigh last week also, and it was right at the top of his desk. He is intent on doing that. Neither one of us know why it hasn't gotten out of Senate Rules. Senate Rules is a holding pen for all bills that come from the House. There are literally hundreds of bills in Senate Rules. But Representative Faircloth has personally asked the chairman of Rules, who holds the key to what gets out, to approve this bill. It is certainly non-controversial. No one cares or has concerns about the bill in the Senate. It just hasn't been handled. But that's our number one priority for the short session for High Point, is to get that bill out of the Senate Rules Committee, approved by the Senate, and enacted into law. If it looks like there's a problem of some sort that we can't figure out and it's not going to get out of rules, Representative Faircloth and I will try to put it in another unrelated bill, which is done often, to spring a bill that's stuck somewhere. So another bill that has nothing to do with High Point or zoning could contain the language we need in this bill. So we'll do that if we need to.
So when you say that there can be a request for council to hear, can that request come from applicant as well as from just a citizen?
No, it would be what we call the petitioner, the one who requested the rezoning. If you delegated some zoning authority to P and Z, that request, under your rules, may go to P and Z for the final decision. But you've got to include some way for the petitioner to ask the city council to review and perhaps overrule the P and Z decision.
So there's no way for a citizen to request that, it's just the petitioner?
Just the petitioner.
I thought we had
Well, we had
discussed
to
a citizen being able to appeal it.
Yeah, I thought.
Like
we
ask a
had
council
this-
member to request it to be appealed.
Well, we can certainly make sure that's in there.
Well, if a citizen asked a councilman to do it, it would be the councilman that was requesting the review, not the
Right.
citizen.
Right,
You'd be doing it on behalf of a citizen, but,
Right.
yes.
yeah, I think we did have something in there about a certain number of councilmen could,
Well,
appeal, I think.
that's another subject I wanted to ask you about.
yeah.
But does that answer your question about that part of it? If the ability of citizens to appeal from P and Z is not in there, we'll make sure it is. And that certainly could be included in the delegation authority that the council gives to P and Z to begin with.
Yeah,
No, I don't
P&Z
think it
would
would-
just get non-controversial zonings in the first place.
Well, that's the idea,
That's the idea.
is to take some workload off your public hearings and your zoning business by shunting the non-controversial, simple zoning request to P and Z.
Well, I think it would be too much red tape if any, I mean, Joanne may be correct me, but if any citizen could do it. But I would like for one of us, on behalf of our constituents, to be able to
Right.
appeal it if need be. If it, like Wesley said, if it was a controversial one and it passed through P and Z, and I still think the elected need to have more authority than the appointed when it
Right.
comes to those situations.
We'll
My
make sure that's
understanding
in
was
there.
that once this passed and gave us the discretion to create it, we would have a fair amount of control over exactly what that wording is. and what that
Absolutely.
process would be.
It was
For us
written to
decide
give you
later.
as much leeway as possible in how this would work.
So we would decide later.
Right.
What that looks like.
Okay.
If we get the authority.
Mayor, your question was about a 1990 local act which passed for High Point, I think. I saw in some of your minutes that this came up for discussion. That bill authorize the council to require a 2/3 vote of council if P and Z recommended denial of a rezoning request, which I think is still the procedure you use here. And the minutes seem to suggest you wanted to repeal that local act.
I think we had some discussion about the rule, but I don't know that there's been any desire to have that repealed.
Well, keep in mind, that also was a discretionary authorization. You could repeal that rule anytime you wanted to
Okay.
without going back. It just allows you to do that, which you've done. But you could undo it if you want to. So there's no need to address that
Sure.
in the legislature, okay? The other things that may come up in the short session of interest is a bad bill that the league is fighting strongly against. It would require building permits for multifamily and commercial to be reviewed and issued within 21 days. The perceived problem is a lot of these permit applications linger for a long time, and people are ready to go with their projects, and they're unhappy that it takes so long to get a permit. If this law passes, if a permit is not issued within 21 days, then the applicant for the permit can go to any qualified engineer or architect and get the plans approved, and that approval would require the city to issue the permit outside its own process. It sounds good in some ways, but ironically, it can serve to delay the full approval of the project, because if this were law, then that 21-day shot clock would take precedence over any other city review of the plans. And instead of doing simultaneous review of different portions of the plan that's been presented, they would have to focus on this 21-day shot clock, which may have the effect of delaying the process rather than shortening it. But that bill is pending. It may get further consideration in the short session, but we are fighting.
Has it passed one of the houses?
Yeah, it passed the House.
Passed the House.
Passed the
What kind of
House.
margin?
Pardon me?
With a unanimous close
No,
vote?
it was not. It was contested in the House. It was about 2/3 to 1/3. Best I remember. It was about 70-30, that kind of thing. So there was opposition and concern in the House. And I don't know if it'll come up in the Senate, but we're concerned about it. There's a rumor that the old question of requiring cities to extend water and sewer without annexation to areas outlying the city, particularly in ETJ, may come up in the short session. Now, High Point doesn't have any ETJ to speak of. So if it's limited to each ETJ, it wouldn't affect you anyway. But I know that your water and sewer extension is dependent on voluntary annexation petitions. So we don't want to be required to extend water and sewer to areas outside the city unless they have a petition for annexation. I don't know if that'll come up, but the Home Builders Association is always working on something like that.
This one brought up from Home Builders Association as well.
Pardon me?
Was the item about the 21-day limit on commercial?
I can't say for sure that the home builders proposed it. I mean, a bill doesn't have the group's name on it, but it's the type of thing that they support.
Right.
But I don't know if they proposed it. There will be some tweaks to the social district law that was enacted last year, which allows cities or counties to designate social districts where you can walk around with an open container of an alcoholic beverage outside the premise that you purchased it from within that designated limited area. The law is apparently working well. A number of cities have designated social districts, and people are using them. I talked to the executive director of the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association about how it was going, And he said very well as far as he knew. He said he had had a call or two from a High Point police officer asking questions about how it worked. He felt like he answered the questions, and he sent him some written information about how these districts work. But I don't know if y'all have any interest in that or not, but if you... Pardon me? Okay. Have you run into problems?
Just,
How do I say this? We are experiencing some very typical bureaucratic nonsense from the state ABC commission.
That is Andy Allen, he's the executive director of Retail Merchants. He said that's the only problems he's aware of are weird interpretations by the ABC Commission.
Yeah.
They
Very
tried to
weird.
say if you buy a six-pack at the grocery store, you can't drive through a social district
Yeah.
on your way home.
Yeah.
Things
They're-
like that.
They're treating social districts as a beer garden, a big outdoor beer garden.
All right.
Is best I can tell you. They're telling us things like, we have to have a vertical barrier around our social district, that you cannot cross a public street with a beverage in a social district.
That's not right.
Yeah, and I've had discussions with Representative Hardister about it, and our staff has been in contact with the staff of the committee that wrote the bill, which
Right.
Hardister's on.
Right.
And basically, we've been told, no, that's not the intent, and that's why they're doing this correction bill,
Right.
although they shouldn't have to.
Right.
I mean, this is nonsensical stuff we're hearing, but,
Well, one city said that the title of the bill says Social Service District, singular. And
Yeah.
because of that, they felt like they couldn't have more than one,
Yeah.
which is not true either. So this correction bill should address some of these weird interpretations that the ABC Commission has been putting on. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Okay. Short-term rentals, I don't know if you have a problem or an interest in those. It's kind of a hot topic across the state.
this is Airbnb. type
Airbnbs, regulation of them. Wilmington got sued and lost in court. They required a permit, a special permit for Airbnb type rentals, which was invalidated by the Court of Appeals. But they are, you can regulate them through zoning. You just can't require a permit. The league will have a dinner for city officials and legislators sometime in May in Raleigh. It will take the place of the traditional Mayor's Day, where they ask everybody to come to Raleigh and go through the legislature and meet with people. It'll be a dinner. It'll be sometime in June, but they haven't set the date. And that's what I think will happen in the short session. Less happens then than in the long session. But I want any of you, please feel free to call me at any time. Some of you have over time, and I'll continue to keep abreast of what's going on.
Thanks, Fred. Any questions for Fred?
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Mr.
you.
Baggett. All right, I think the last thing on the agenda is an attorney-client privilege item. We'll need to go into closed session for that, so
Motion to go in closed session.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Go into closed session. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we're now in closed session. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes. So we are back live again, I believe, and our closed session is over, and we'll be reconvening at 5:30 for the regular council meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn the special meeting?
So moved. Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to adjourn the special meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes, and the special meeting is adjourned.